Patrick Johnston, Canucks This Week. Go to theprovince.com, vancouversun.com, read Patrick's stuff if you're a masochist. Read Ben's stuff, JJ Adams, Steve Ewan, the whole lot.
Before we do anything else, are you going to assign JJ to write, like it's the most JJ story ever, Pete Carroll to the Raiders?
I know.
That's all we care about at this point, right? We don't care about the Canucks. We don't care about anything else.
Well, unfortunately, he hasn't been able to get him. But Mo Elwanibi, who, Rick Dollywall still struggles with that name. The one scoop that I beat him on, and there's a great internet industry story there that I don't want to bore Canuck fans with. But
in the news, you mean media, not internet story.
BC guy from Kamloops lives here now. He played in the last Washington NFL team's NFC Championship, won a Super Bowl that year, so there is a local connection to that. But yes, people might want to distract themselves with the NFL for a couple more weeks at least because this Canucks situation is so dire. So we'll talk about some bigger picture stuff. The loss to the Sabres obviously was a tough one. The contrast between playing the Oilers with Connor McDavid and getting a 3-0 lead and holding on and showing some fight, and then what happened last night, Patrick, that's something that really intrigued me. I get it. You go into that building, it's going to be emotional. They were down 3-0 at the end of the first period. I expected some pushback. I think it was 9 minutes into the period before the Canucks had their first shot. Have all the coach's buttons that he can push to try and elicit a reaction, have they all been pushed and they just don't work anymore? This team seems lifeless.
Oh, Tyler Horsfall, let's just go right at it. Tyler Horsfall on Blue Sky makes this fabulous point. Here is a list of NHL teams with fewer regulation wins since the holiday break than the Canucks. And blank. That's how bad things are. The starts, you mentioned this, they fall behind in so many ways. These two games, you put these two games next to each other, and it is the story of the season. They scored first against the Oilers, and they won. And in too little shock, you score first, you tend to win. Last season, the Canucks scored first 53 times. This season, they scored just 19 times. That is a massive difference. And chasing the game is hard, and the Canucks just don't have any spirit right now. You watch them play, you can see the way they play, what a mess this room clearly is. Everything we hear, I hear from the source, it just said, this is embarrassing. They've got to do something. Someone who's connected to the room. This is embarrassing. And that's, I just keep hearing that. And I hear, that management knows. They know they're going to have to do something. But it's not exactly groundbreaking or earth-shattering that the offers are terrible, because the Canucks' trading position is terrible. That teams come into this saying, well, you guys have to make a move, so here's our junk.
So this is the dilemma, right? Pettersson is the guy you want to keep, but Pettersson has a lot more market value, and I think it's pretty clear, by the way, that they won't be trading him. But I'm just saying, when you look at what your assets are, right? So this is the guy that would actually still probably get you a return because you have an open market on him at this point. We all know the issues with JT Miller, whatever, he took his leave, he's got some injury issues. We know what kind of a player he can be, but he certainly hasn't been close to that this year. Plus he has a no movement clause. So there is no market there. So do the Canucks have to look at this of just addition by subtraction and getting whatever they can get for him? Or is there hope that you can at least manufacture a little bit of a jump here and maybe open up the market? Are there other pieces at play? Obviously we know about Brock Besser's contract situation. Thatcher Demko, maybe you think goaltending is something else that you can leverage as we get closer to the playoffs. I just don't know. I'm starting to see the people turn on this front office, and they really have one hand tied behind their back in this situation, and I'm not quite sure what they can do. What, in your expert opinion, being around the team, how would you play this?
I don't have an easy answer on that, because it's a sense on the dollar situation. It's not a situation they plan to be in, right? They came into this season being, we're a playoff team, we need to improve, right? And the players have gone in completely the other direction in a way that has not happened in Jim Rutherford's career. So for him to sit back and look at this and be like, what is going on? He himself is not going to really know necessarily how to cope with it. He's going to be immensely frustrated from what I know of Jim. That there's a guy, he has set a level of expectation through his entire career as a manager, and he's been right in doing so. And yet this group has not reacted it. You can see the angst in Rick Tocchet's face after every game. Now, he's a guy that is not going to sit back and go, woe is me. He is a guy that has been through it all. He's a guy that in his heart believes he knows what it takes to be a winner. And it's on him that he takes on the job. He's the coach, right? That for all the chaos, all the frustration that he may be dealing with, that he certainly can't tell us about, above it all, there's games to be won, games to be played. But it's surely immensely frustrating. You look at all the guys, at all of them, and that's why I think they know there is a playing imperative to make a deal here. But they also recognize that they can't. It seems to me they recognize they can't make a deal just for making its own sake. But they need to figure out a way to make this work. And so whether that's they wait for other teams. I mean, Patrick Allvin brought up the question of cap space the other day when we talked to him, and I followed up on that. I said, does that clearly by the time the deadline comes, there will be more cap space for other teams to work with, and he acknowledged that. So where you look at the playing and the sort of the secondary belief. I mean, it's wild to say it'd be a secondary belief to make the playoffs this season. I mean, that was always the plan, and I have to assume it's still the plan. But the primary purpose right now is to fix the room.
So
a trade obviously needs to happen. And and just as you mentioned, Brock Besser, Brock Besser talks about people need to show up the right mindset. I mean, the implication that there's players showing up without the right mindset is staggering. And that he said a similar thing to me last week, but he was way more spelled it out. Absolutely staggering to hear that he feels there's guys that are just showing up not in the right mood.
I mean, this is part of the problem that I think everyone knows this, that whoever started the leaks about the problems in the room, and we've known for several seasons that there were guys on that team that weren't best friends. And then every analyst, every former player will say, oh, every team I played on had guys that didn't get along. But I think, unfortunately, now we're dealing with 1 to 2 months of everyone knowing that there's a rupture in that room.
Yeah, right.
You have written and talked about the fact that, perhaps it was underestimated the role that Zadorov and Cole played in that room. So let me ask you this. If you don't feel that you're getting anywhere near market value to move JT Miller, would there be any hope of moving someone else, whether it's one of your only 2 prospects or a Demko or a Besser or whomever, to bring in leadership, to bring in someone who could maybe work on repairing that? Is that an option at all, or is that just too hard a deal to make at this point?
I think it's too difficult to really parse that. I mean, you obviously, when you trade for a player, you try to understand who they are, what they bring to the situation from a sort of a character standpoint, right? But fundamentally, you don't know how that's going to play out. I really think it has become clear that the Canucks underestimated what removing 2 sort of strong personalities in Ian Cole and Nikita Zadorov would do to this team. I don't think that's the only reason. I mean, it is clear that something much bigger, I think, has broken. We don't know what it is, to be clear. We don't know what it is, but the signs are all there. And whenever we're in the next phase of this story, we may have some better sense of what has happened, but we still don't really know what's happened. So, would having those 2 around have changed that dynamic? I don't know. I mean, but it is clear that part of the problem is the way this team feels about itself, how this team interacts with each other. It's not good, and I was talking with a couple of people this week about what it could be, and the Messier thing, the Keenan Messier season in 97-98 was obviously chaotic and messy and immensely painful. But that was like intentional from the top in many ways. Keenan, for all his madness and whatever, he was a guy that believed that keeping his players on edge and disrupted was a positive and would motivate them better. Now it was crazy, but that's the way he operated. And he looked at the way that team had been functioning. This is now three and a half years out from making the Stanley Cup final, losing to Keenan's team. And he said, listen, something has to change. And I don't think anybody would disagree that things had to change. The way it happened was awful, of course.
Well, but Patrick,
and what in the end it was from the top. It wasn't internal.
It wasn't within, yeah.
That's what I mean. And that's the difference between here. And the only thing comparable, like I was talking, Farhan Lalji said, what about Printers Dickinson? I mean, I suppose you could weigh in on that. But even then, this is so partly because we don't understand really what's broken. We know things are broken, but we don't know why. It's harder to assess what really might fix this, other than what we can tell, which is that the management knows they need to make a trade, and more than likely it's JT Miller.
The Printers Dickinson thing, I think, is only applicable in the fact that there were two players who only one of them could play.
Right.
It would be almost like if the disagreement was between Lankinen and Demko,
right,
and you have like this chasm in the locker room of who am I going to support?
Right.
You've got two players who could be on the ice at the same time, or certainly just on different lines and still contributing.
And have done fine together in the past. It's not like they didn't. I mean, they didn't like each other socially, but they played well together, plenty well.
I think this is part of the problem, is that you can talk about mood and you can talk about, how it's impacting the rest of the team, but the bottom line is the results aren't there.
Yeah.
And again, it strikes me with Tom Wilson coming to town. I haven't actually looked at it, but last week when we were looking at the fact that Tom Wilson of the Capitals has the same amount of goals as Elias Pettersson and JT Miller combined, says an awful lot. And I think production, if the production was there, they don't have to like each other. But what's your sense that at the trade deadline, like what percentage of chance would you put on JT Miller still being here post-trade deadline?
I mean, I know I saw Gary Mason, obviously. I think Gary was speaking from his gut, to be clear. Gary obviously hears from the...
Rick Dollywell speaks from his gut. That's what he hears.
But, sometimes he hears from the owner. I think I don't think from the outside Gary's wrong in terms of how management has operated in the past, like Jim Rutherford has operated. He has always, everything's been about hockey and winning hockey. And they, in the end, signed Miller because they believe in him playing a role on this team. And they committed to him. I'm not sure they ever said he will be here for all 7 years of his contract, but they certainly said he will be here for the next few. And, Quinn Hughes is another 2 years on this deal. And that, to me, is the window really to understand, in which to understand all this. But the dynamic behind the scenes has clearly shifted so much that I am not confident in in going with your gut on this as Gary is. And Gary's removed from this, and he will admit that. But he has obviously been around sports teams for a long time, and he knows. Normally, he would be right. I think there would be no argument. I think the probability, I rated it a couple of weeks ago when we were trying to figure this. I said there's a 1% chance Pettersson gets traded, a 10% chance that Miller gets traded. I think it's much higher than 10% now with Miller. I think it's almost, I don't think it's 100%, because as I've said many times, you never say never in hockey. But.
Well, okay, so one of the things.
It's a high percentage he is not here.
I think ultimately both fans, certainly the coach, and certainly the front office, are the hope that this will fix itself is fading every game, right?
It's
not
fixing itself.
No, but I've seen a lot of exasperation from many people outside of this market who don't follow it closely, don't know the things that you know, who just cannot fathom that this team was so good for last year and got to so far in the playoffs, played Edmonton so well, and it just keeps sliding away. Like, people are citing, like, I can't recall the last team that had things blow up this bad. You talked about this a month ago. Colorado did a hard reset. It's going to take some skill and it's going to be difficult to do, but you can choose which pieces you want. And make that happen pretty quickly. It may not work, but you can take a swing. I look at this team and it's still like when you're ready to write them off, like going from, oh, here we go, they lost in overtime again. They struggle. They beat the Leafs. They look really good in Toronto. Then they get absolutely blown out and look like they don't belong on the same ice by the Jets and Kings. And you're like, okay, what's going on? Then they look great against the Oilers, and then they look terrible again. It's like it literally is one step forward, 2 or 3 steps back. Patrick, I don't know where this goes, but I do look at, a good Capitals team coming in here on the weekend. What's the crowd's response going to be?
Yeah.
Like, I always see people go like, I just don't enjoy watching this team. And then they go on the road against some teams really that they have to beat. St. Louis, Nashville, and Dallas. What direction is this team going? Is anyone on this team besides Quinn Hughes capable of saying, let's go, guys. Or not even saying anything, but just doing something. Like you mentioned Besser. Besser's comments were interesting, but there's a lot of games where I don't notice Besser either. Like, at what point does someone show some pride? And
I'd say, well, like I said this something the other day, like, we had the question, Trevor Henderson, the cameraman for Global, had a great question.
Gold shoes.
Had a great comment for Rick Tocchet the other day, saying, he sees the world through the camera. He pays attention to faces, and he has not seen a happy face in that room for a long time. And Rick sort of said, well, winning should make you happy. And I get what Rick's saying. I think actually...
Well, just let me interject. What was the mood like on Saturday night in the locker room after beting the Oilers? Was there not a little bit of levity in there?
Elated, yeah, I would say so. But again, it's a consistency thing, right? Like Jeremy Swayman, the morning the Bruins were here, the Bruins were in the midst of a funk. They haven't had a very good season, and they had a team hug. And I can't even imagine the Canucks having a team hug, right? And that's
why don't you suggest that, Patrick? Come on, Saturday. Get in there. Ask the team to gather around.
I talked to Brock Besser last week. Part of the discussion is him talking about how much he loves walking in the woods. He goes out to Pacific Spirit Park, and I know you go out there as well. But
I haven't seen him. My wife has.
Yeah, but anyway, we take the dog out, and he loves it. And it partly was him sort of explain. It was clear it was clear how much he loves living here. But I sort of said at the end, I said, maybe you guys just need a big family group walk in the woods. He goes, yeah, maybe that, and he appreciated what I was saying.
Well, captain's nickname is Huggy.
But to me, it's not just it's a confidence thing. Who exudes confidence right now? I don't even know if Quinn Hughes does. I mean, Quinn Hughes operates in his own way, obviously, and he's getting it done. So he is exuding confidence. Yeah, and Brock Besser to a degree, but when those guys talk, you don't go, these guys are confident they're going to win tonight. These guys are like, I hope I get back to my best play.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a problem.
Well, I mean, I shouldn't, from a business point of view, obviously the Pettersson Miller thing is good. Whenever we write, as much as people say they're sick of it, whenever we write about it, whenever we talk about it, it gets good numbers. From a fan's point of view, I would find it exhausting. Yeah. There are other issues on that team, issues that could and should be fixed with this. You had said from the start of the year, when none of this soap opera had really arisen yet, that we thought that there was a big trade that could happen to bolster the defense, and that was really what the team needed. And you were looking at the salary cap, and that was how the season seemed to be plotted out. Well, they'll do okay, and they'll see where they are in the playoff, and they're not far out of the playoffs at this point. I mean, it's not shocking to think that they could still make it, but it's so much more than fixing the defense now. As you said, it's fixing the room, and I don't know what. I mean, we could talk about will a healthy Dakota Joshua help make a difference because he brings something physical? Will bringing in another defenseman, youth from the farm, there's nothing that is going to change this team's fortunes until that central issue gets fixed. So I guess we have to keep talking about it. Well,
yeah, you talk around Dakota Joshua is a good example, or Niels Höglander, a related issue is this team's depth scoring. has been an utter failure.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just the defense isn't good enough or the defense court isn't good enough. Like fundamentally, Niels Höglander. I mean, Höglander's been playing better, but he hasn't been finishing. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a problem. Dakota Joshua just has looked like a shell of himself, and I think we can understand. Like the guy is,
of course, yeah,
coming off cancer treatment. Like,
but if we go back to last season, I mean, and aside from the roles, I thought their best two players in the playoffs last year were Lindholm and Zadorov. And that's why I didn't understand really this general fan reaction to be like, oh, that's too much money for Zadorov. Honestly, like when the games mattered most, he was physical, he showed leadership, and he produced at both ends of the ice. But if I look at this team last year in the playoffs, when you talk about secondary scoring, Pettersson was not good in the playoffs last year.
No.
Demko wasn't there. And this hope that you were this close to the Oilers, who went to Game 7 in the Stanley Cup final, and you think, well, if Pettersson is either healthy or is in the right mind space and Demko's there, and then you add to that, well, of course this team can compete. So I think that's why everyone is like you've talked about the depth in scoring, the problems on the blue line, the guys you've lost in the room, and then the production of your stars. Like, tell me one thing that's gone right for the Vancouver Canucks this season.
One thing.
Lankinen and DeBrusk, I guess.
Quinn Hughes and Kevin Lankinen.
Yeah.
DeBrusk to a degree. I mean, I think, he's certainly the finish is there, the playing style. I mean, I don't know why, you sort of hear the noises that, oh, well, we wish he was this or that. I'm like, this is what he is. He's a smart, hardworking player, for the most part, who scores you some goals. But he's, in the end, he's probably, he's the second line winger. He's not a top line winger. He's not Jake Gensel. But he's been fine. He's been what they wanted him to be. And so that's good. And Kevin Lankinen's been pretty good. And Quinn Hughes is having an amazing season. But it's all drawn, weighed down by the lack of production from Pettersson, the lack of production from Miller, as you said. I mean, I went and double checked. You're absolutely right. They're still there. There are 19 goals combined between Miller and Pettersson. Tom Wilson has 20 goals. So,
that's we use the word embarrassing a lot, several times in this video. That's embarrassing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And therein lies the problem. Like, there is an element too of like Thatcher Demko clearly is not himself. They have not been getting, when he's started, he's not, against Buffalo, obviously the team did not defend very well. All three goals had defensive breakdowns in front of Demko. But those are moments when it would be good if you could get a great save.
Yeah.
Right? And you're not, it's just not been there for him so far.
If you're down 1-0 at the end of the first period in Edmonton and your goalie has stood on his head, there can be a reaction. And I'm not suggesting he was at fault of any of them. No, but when you're down 3-0 and then it takes 10 minutes to get a shot in the second period, and now all of a sudden you're down 5-0, it's just that everything's going on.
Miserable.
Okay. Speaking of Tom Wilson, Capitals at home on Saturday and then away to the Blues, Preds, and Stars. How many of those did they win last week? I said they'd go 2-2. I think you did as well. I had them beating the Oilers twice. At least I got one of those right. But 1-3 in those games. But out of these 4 games, how many do you think they win?
Just by the way, that just them going 1-3 is just, I mean, it's only, it's a small, but that's it's just staggering. I know it's staggering already, but you're just like,
especially when you get a win against the Oilers, and then you take any momentum you got and you throw it in the garbage by losing to the Sabres. That's ridiculous. But
Capitals are the top of the league, but there's weird things in their play that make you suggest they're last year's Canucks, and so they're not quite as good as you think. But the Canucks have been terrible at home, so I think Washington's going to come in and win. I hope Ovi gets booed because he should. God, it's so hard to say. I mean, they do somehow win games and play well occasionally. How many games in this sample?
4. The Predators are not a good team, but they've struggled. The Canucks have struggled against them this year.
I'm going to say they'll win 1 game on the road. They'll go 1-3. It's just miserable.
I'm going to say 2-2, just because.
Yeah, 2-2, just because you're safe.
I'm more optimistic than you are. You're the negative one. Okay, we went a bit long, but a lot to talk about, a lot happening. Go check out all our stuff this week at theprovince.com, vancouversun.com, Patrick has a great piece on Corey Perry and why he didn't actually have to fight anyone. And I put a poll on that was a little bit cheeky, references Connor McDavid's mom. We also have our weekly roundup Canucks this week about what other people are saying about the Canucks. And it's this perplexion that the team has fallen so far so quickly. People putting playoff percentages, dropping in the various power rankings. It's very interesting. And of course, the notably impartial Edmonton media and their take on the game last night.
Did you write the headline on that one, or did Dave? Because that's a plunger.
It was a combination.
You guys did a call on the marriage counselor. It's brilliant.
Yeah. He did the marriage counselor, and I added the Oilers embarrassment type stuff. But it was, there's some good stuff in there. So go check it out, theprovince.com, vancouversun.com. Sign up for our newsletter, Canucks Report. All this stuff will come right to your inbox. You can decide whether you want to read it or not at that point. Patrick, thank you for your work. We will be back next week.